I remember the reporters were like, "Who are you?"
Yeah.
And I'm like, "Well, I race late model stocks, whatever." And Dale pleaded for me, man. He
Still
honestly,
is.
he still does.
Yeah.
But he was like, "Man, this kid, we need a partner. We need to find this kid opportunity. Like, he deserves it. He can do it." And I think both of us walked out of there that night feeling like something was going to happen, like something was going to come from that.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Go on the ball. California's Kevin Harvick does it. Straight naked right there. You're the man.
Welcome to Kevin Harvick's Happy Hour, presented by NASCAR on Fox, and we're excited to have another guest in studio this week, Josh Berry. And for me, this is going to be fun because I got a lot of questions of just what you compare to, what the driving style's like, everything that's happened with that 4-car since I've been out of it. But tell us about Pocono. You got to do a little bit of racing this week. What'd you think?
Pocono is a fun track. I really have enjoyed racing there, and we had some good speed. Obviously, qualified really well, which we kind of qualified better than we expected. I feel like based off how practice went, so that was encouraging. But it seemed like we had good pace taking off. We'd build pretty tight later in the run, and I think that's what some of our struggle was. We had a kind of up and down day with the strategy. I had one restart where I got super loose into one and went out the groove and thought I had a tire going down, pitted, and we couldn't really find anything. So I don't know, really still don't know what exactly happened there. But we battled back from there, led some laps, just, kind of just the strategy and everything didn't fall our way.
What's the hardest thing that you've had to learn as you've gone through this whole journey of going into the 4-car, running cup races? You ran a few cup races in the 9-car, but I tell people a lot when they ask, what do you think about Josh and Rodney or whatever the scenario is? Gosh, you're in your low 30s as far as the amount of races that you've run in a cup car, and we hear so many people talk about, well, they need 100 races to understand the dynamics of everything that's going on and learn about cup racing. And that's become a lot harder with this particular car. Tell me about your journey, I guess you could say, from the cup races that you ran, transitioning into the 4-car and everything that you've gone through and what all has come with that as far as what you've had to learn with the processes and just cup racing in general.
Yeah, I think, for one, like you say on the starts, I feel like sometimes I get looked at that I have more experience than I do necessarily, whether that's in Xfinity cars or cup cars. Cause really, I got a later start in my career, but I've raced a lot and have had, a lot of accomplishments in the short track racing that I did before. That sometimes I think I get judged like I'm a little bit more of a veteran than I am, I guess,
Yeah.
if you actually look at the paper. I think last year, going into this, what last year taught me driving HMS was like how hard this was really going to be. I think going there and working with those guys and experiencing all that really gave me a clear indication of just how competitive and how difficult cup racing is, right? So that was great for me in that experience to be around guys like Kyle and William and take in things from them and get the experience of the obviously on track racing, but then the experience in the debriefs and working with the team. So I felt like I went into this knowing that it was going to be difficult. And I think now the biggest thing that I'm looking for, and even now, now that I've transitioned into the 21 car and having conversations with those guys, it's like, well, how do I take the next step and to me, that's just consistency, right? And I don't know if you'd asked me a year ago, well, how does that help? I would say, well, I'd like to work with the same crew chief and the same group for a little bit of time. That's going to change again,
Yeah.
so that didn't happen. But I think it's just experience. I think I look at the potential we've shown. Right, we've qualified on the front row a couple of times. We had a couple of top fives, a couple of really good races, and then we've had some tough races too. So I think the biggest thing that I'm looking for is like, how do I just get more consistent? And I don't know if that's a question that I'm still trying to answer. Right? Is that part of my prep or my process, or am I being too aggressive, not aggressive enough, or is it just going to be experience?
Yeah, I think a lot of that is experience. I think a lot of that just comes with time, just because of the fact that you can help the engineer and you can help the crew chief and you can help them make those calls, and so much of it has become strategy, but also not misleading your team down a path that maybe you're going down, and you need to pull the reins back and say, hey, let's take 2 steps back. And I guess that leads me to my next question. When you come into a situation like you have with the 4 car, and we had 10 years worth of notes and characteristics and driving styles and theories and everything that we had as a group with Rodney and the engineers, what has that been like for you, trying to work through what is, you're going to have it, everybody's got a different driving style and different things that they focus on. What have been some of the things that you've focused on and said, these don't work with the things that I use compared to the things that you like? Some of those things that you and Rodney and your engineers have had to work through to just say, we need to go a different path. What have some of those characteristics changed?
I think on the short track and kind of the unique, maybe small intermediates like your Darlingtons, your Dovers, like I really feel like that we've really had good success based off what y'all have done the last couple of years. Really, the speed's been there. Places like Richmond, Martinsville, Darlington was really good for us. I think that's been pretty, kind of plug and play in a way. I think the biggest change has just been the intermediates. And I think a lot of that's just me adapting to this new car and figuring out how I want to drive it and the style I like to drive it. And then obviously Ford has a new body, and there's some things different there. But it seems like that's where we've had to, basically just focus on getting the car a little bit more secure on entry. I think this was the biggest thing that we've fought. And I think that, your driving style, I think, allowed you to run the car a little bit freer than what I like. And with this next gen car, it's hard too, because like you have to carry so much throttle into the corner and have this huge shape, and I think that's kind of what I've been finding on, like, especially early in the year, I was like trying to get that comfort of, how the car felt so I could really learn and experience the race better. And now we're kind of backing off on it. And it's like now I'm coming back more towards where y'all were last year, and so we just need to be somewhere in the middle, I guess.
So when you talk about the SMT data and the simulator, how far ingrained into that are you? Because for me, I was always one of those guys that said, hey, I want to use it. I want to listen. I want to observe. I want to correct some of the conversations that we have between crew chief engineer to try to keep things on track. But how ingrained are you into saying, okay, I like this, I like that from the simulator or watching on SMT? Rodney and I were always communicating. Steve, my engineer, we were always communicating about that stuff. How do you approach that?
We've been, trying to find the balance in that, I think, right? Because I think in a way, obviously, I think using the simulator has been really good. I think that's been a good tool for us. We've had pretty good results with, some of our better races have been our better simulator sessions or whatever. So it's definitely, we've had some success in that. I think that, diving into the data and going from practice and stuff's a little bit harder, because I think for me, I'm taking in so much information so fast that sometimes it's we don't want to over analyze it. I think, obviously we spend a lot of time looking at that stuff beforehand, but it's hard. I think back to, I think back to this at Iowa, actually. We practiced okay at Iowa. We come in the next day, it rained. In the track, and then like the first couple cars went out to qualify, and they were like 2 seconds off because the track was so slick, and it just the track kept getting faster. And Cheddar actually, he's like leans in the window, he's like, "What are you gonna do?" And I'm like, "I'm gonna go hit 4 good corners."
Yeah,
and he's like, "That's a good plan." And then we qualified well, right? And sometimes you just it's that balance of like preparing and focusing on that, but at the same time just trusting your instincts and what comes natural, and just just going and doing it, really, right? Like I don't think that. The preparation side of things is more so to make things come more naturally when you're out there doing it, I feel like. And on the car stuff, like I think I'm just learning, right? Like
it's too complicated.
Yeah, I mean it's just
too complicated to completely understand it. It's a science project.
Yeah, I mean you can't ever. But I think for me, like I think back to, there's been so many things happen this year that I think back, I'm like, man, I wish Nashville was one that comes to mind. Like we practiced okay. I was pretty tight, but it's like you don't really know how tight you are until, and then we qualified well. So we're like, okay, well the car, and then we get in the race and we're way too tight. And it's just building that experience
Yeah.
is what's just going to take time to know what direction to send those guys.
Has Rodney yelled at you yet?
Not one time. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
One time.
Why?
Because
Over?
do what?
Over what?
It was at Chicago. Which Chicago was a difficult day. And then I think we had a little bit of miscommunication on whether, he was asking me if I wanted to pit. I said I wanted to. I thought we needed to. And then he said that more or less it was a
That's a dumb decision.
It was a kinda, yeah. But I smarted off to him, and then he chewed my ass, but I deserved it.
Yeah. Well, I think back to those moments. We never yelled at each other much. There was a few times, and we started in 2014, and we started off really good, and then we kind of got into this lull. And Michigan, I mean, we had a disaster on pit road. Should have won the race, and I came in, and I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, what am I going to do to see if I can get a rise out of this guy and see if we can stir things up here a little bit? So I took the steering wheel and I just whacked the dash one time. I'm going to say, I'm going to see how he reacts to his dash being torn up in his race car. Wrong move. That pissed him off more than yelling at him on the radio, because he flipped out because I had banged the dash in with the steering wheel, and I did it intentionally just to see if I could get a rise out of him. Well, I got a rise out of him, but it was not productive at all. So it's always interesting to hear those dynamics. But I want to go back. Tell me about your journey of how you got here, because we talk about how people think you have been here for a long time, but tell me where you started and your journey just through the racing ranks to get to where you are in Cup today.
Yeah, so I grew up in Middle Tennessee. I started racing when I was 8, racing go-karts. It was just me and my family.
Track
Yeah, flat. Yeah, oval.
Oval track.
Asphalt
Okay.
oval.
Yep.
At the time, that was pretty popular. And I raced that for a couple years. Ultimately, it just got to where it was just too expensive for us to do a lot of traveling. There really wasn't much, there was racing in that area, but we needed to branch out to have more competition. And it just got to where it was just too expensive. And we actually decided to build a little 4-cylinder car to race at the quarter mile at the National Fairgrounds. We built that. I raced that for 2 or 3 years, I think. And then we got a legend car, and I raced a legend car there for probably 4 years. And that's when obviously my life gets pretty interesting, I guess, because I was, I think 18 or 19 years old. I was playing iRacing a lot. That was when it was becoming more popular. And to me, that was a great way to race, and it didn't cost a lot of money, right? Like you're racing real people on there, right? Like it's real competition. And so I had success doing that and enjoyed it. And I got to know Dale on there just kind of as friends.
Randomly.
Yeah, I mean, he was racing on there too at the time. I got to be friends with him. They had a couple leagues and stuff they were doing on there. I remember racing in it, one of the, his league a couple times, and we just struck up a friendship really. And I can't remember exactly how it all started, but I know, Dale was asking me about my past and my history and what I raced and what I did. And I remember sending him some videos of me racing and all this stuff. And he was like, what do you want to do? And I was like, well, man, I'd just love to race a late model on time or something, right? Because at that time there was no plan or path to me to race anything other than what I was doing. Now, really, we could barely afford what we were doing there.
Right. And
he asked me if I was interested in testing his late model at Motor Mile. And of course I was like, holy shit. Yeah. So went up, came over, met with them. And then we went to a test. I want to say it was like January, February. This was 2010 at Motor Mile with those guys. The test went good. I ran pretty good. And then he said, all right, well, you can run the first 2 races and then we'll see from there, right? So I was still living in Tennessee at the time. We're driving back and forth. Went and ran the first 2 races at Motor Mile that year. They went fairly decent. There's a good. I can't remember exactly where I finished. I think just outside the top 10 in the first one, and then maybe inside the top 10 in the second one. There was about 30 cars, I think, in
All
those.
late model stocks,
Yeah,
though.
late model
Yeah.
stocks. Yeah, and after that, he was like, "Hey, we'll figure out a plan." He's like, "We'll figure out something. I'm working on it, whatever." So I went back to Tennessee for a couple months, and then he eventually, um, they offered me a job because obviously I need money. If I was going to move here, I needed
Right.
money, right, to live. So they offered me a job at Junior Motorsports.
To
As
drive?
No, well, no, this was as a mechanic in the Xfinity
Okay.
shop. Or I say mechanic loosely. I washed the cars after I did tear down. I washed the cars. I did pit practice, so I had to clean all the wheels, glue all the wheels, air all the tires, drive the pit practice car. Um, and there for a couple months, actually, I lived with Willie Jackson and Brenda Dale. So that's Dale's stepdad and mother. I lived with them for like a month until the apartment that I was getting came available or whatever. So that was a funny story too. And so I worked at the Xfinity shop, kind of at the bottom, sweeping the floor level, right, and then worked on the late model car at nighttime. And eventually that transitioned into where I could go work full time for the late model team, and
Yeah.
just that I probably did that for 2 years, and then eventually that worked to where I went full time just on the late model team, and obviously got to drive the late model car full time. The first year it was kind of part time here there, and then that transitioned to where I was racing the late model full time and got to work there too.
So before you go any further, where did you get your mechanical ability to work on the cars? Because when you've driven our cars and been around our cars, like you're super hands on. So where did that mechanical ability and knowledge of the race cars start? Is that something that you had to do from the very beginning, or did you learn that while at Junior Motorsports and along the way before or after that?
Well, I think when I was, in my mid teens and we were legend car racing, that's probably when I learned a lot throughout that. I was, really, my dad owned a restaurant, and basically when he was either working or we were racing,
Hmm.
kind of was where it ended up. So it got to when I was a little bit older and more capable that, I was hands on with the car, right? Like if we were going to a different track, I would change the gear in it. I would change the oil in it. I would, clean it, whatever, and get it ready to go to the next. So really over time, it's the more I raced, the more hands on I got. And then, but really where I really learned how to work on a race car was when I, started at Junior Motorsports.
Okay.
I would say I learned a lot from there because I actually worked in an Xfinity shop with structure and everything that goes along with that. So I learned a lot in that short amount of time. And then when I transitioned to the late model program, um, the fun thing is it's tough, but it's fun. And some people struggle with this is like when you're working there and doing that, like you have to do a little bit of everything, right? So I would say that throughout that process, like I never got to be a really good fabricator or a really good mechanic, but I could do a little bit of everything. And that came from, Brian Schaefer worked there. He still runs that program. He's been just like a second father to me, like great part of my life. And he taught me so much about everything. And I'd say that's where I really started to become more and more hands on.
So you have this relationship at Junior Motorsports, and obviously Dale and I, we have this partnership with Justin Marks and Jeff Burton owning the Cars Tour. But the thing that I have learned is Kelly's in charge, and I love Kelly to death because she makes that whole thing go around for all of us and our vision and is so much a part of that. And I think it's interesting because of the fact that Dale is Dale, right? Like he carries this extreme weight with whether it's late model racing or our sport or whatever it is. But behind the scenes, she's really the one making sure that that vision is in place. So when I look at going from the late model team to the Xfinity team, you have the success in the late models. Was that you and Dale talking? How did that opportunity with the Xfinity car come about to actually? I know there wasn't a lot there to make it happen, but it happened and led you to where you are today.
Well, I think it was it was a number of things really. So over the course of 14, 15, 16, I think I got a couple one-off starts here and there. And usually it was kind of like I think the first one the first one they kind of just did, and then we had a sponsor for a couple of them, and I remember just had a couple one-offs, but just a couple of them went pretty good, but I just never had that moment where it like went really, really good, right? Like the closest to that was, I think it was in 2016, I ran a race at Richmond. I believe Casey Kane was supposed to drive it, and he decided not to because he was in the chase, close to the
That's right.
chase, something, something,
I
something.
remember that.
And I drove the 88 car and like running the top 5 the whole night. And honestly, I stood a chance to probably winning the thing if I had any experience on pit road. Right, I was learning all that
Yeah.
stuff on the fly. Like, and it wasn't. And I'll say this too. Like, I remember that night. Like, I remember passing Kyle Busch, passing Joey Logano. I racing with Chase. I think he ended up winning the race. Like the Xfinity Series it was stacked with Cup guys at the time. And I run in the top 5 a lot of that race. I think I ended up finishing 7th. And I remember after the race, they come and got me and they're like, hey, you got to go to the media center. And I'm like, what? I finished 7th, and I'm in there and it's Chase Elliott, Kyle Busch, and me in there because they wanted to talk to me. And I remember the reporters were like, who are you?
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, I race late model stocks, whatever. And really, and Dale pleaded for me, man. He
Still
honestly
is.
He still does.
Yeah.
But he was like, man, this kid, we need a partner. We need to find this kid an opportunity. Like, he deserves it. He can do it. And I think both of us walked out of there that night feeling like something was going to happen, like something was going to come from that. And I mean, I ran 2 more races the next year. I think I finished, I think it was top 10s or ran in the top 10. I don't remember exactly where I finished, but nothing really materialized from that like we thought. And I don't know why, really. Looking back on it, I don't really know why. I think I'm sure I could have done things different. I could have beat on more doors. I could have been, maybe more aggressive in that stuff. But at the same time, I was racing full time in the late model and loved doing that. Loved racing those and enjoyed doing it. And I guess I just am old school in the fact that, like, I think that if you do well enough, long enough, something will come your way, I guess. And so anyways, after that, like, we really, I would say from 18, 19, 2020, like, I was full-time late model racing, but we were kicking ass. Like, we were winning. We finally won the big race at Martinsville. That was a huge moment for us, winning that race. And we won a lot of Cars Tour races, won a Cars Tour championship. And really at that point, I had kind of made peace with myself that I wasn't going to race at the top level. And it's not that I didn't want to. It's just that I just was like, hey, there's a place in racing for guys like me or Bubba Pollard or Lee Pulliam, Philip Morris. Like, I'm like, if just because I'm not racing in NASCAR doesn't mean I can't go out and try to be the most badass short track racer in the country, right? And that's where I was at with it. I was like, we won Martinsville, that was a big deal. And then we won, this big race, that big race. Like we won at Myrtle Beach. We were just kind of checking things off the list. And I think kind of how I got here, I guess, was in 2020 with COVID and everything going on. So the schedules got jammed up. Well, we had the race at Ace, and Bobby McCarty and I had a rivalry going there for a while that he was getting the better end of more often than not. And we were racing at Ace. He got in, we made contact, I wrecked, I'm multiple laps down. And we just collectively as a group, it wasn't just me. It was a collective decision. Actually, Robert, who, was actually the voice of reason. He actually tried to talk me out of it. Oh my God. Believe it or not.
That's
he really
unbelievably
did.
hard to
believe. I more or less, I waited for Bobby and wrecked him on the front stretch. He was leading the race, about to win. So I got not my proudest moment, but I felt like that it was time to settle the score or whatever and be done with it. So ultimately, then I get suspended a week for wrecking him on purpose, which was well deserved. And uniquely, due to COVID and everything that was going on, we had raced several races at Hickory and won and had accumulated some national points. So I remember calling Dale and being like, hey, I think we can go race for the weekly series national championship. And he's like, really? And I'm like, yeah, like, what do you think about this? And they were like, go do it. So we did. We went after it, really. We were racing some nights, we'd race Hickory on Saturday, and then, load the cars up and then drive to Southern National on Sunday and go race. And they were all twin races. So we would, end up getting like 3 or 4 races in a weekend. When the dust settled from all that, like I think I'd won, in counting some of the year-end races that we went back and did, like I won 28 races, I think, that
Wow.
year.
I didn't realize it was that many.
I think it was 28 out of 36 or
Holy
something.
crap.
It was something like that. It was stupid.
Yeah.
And so yeah, we ended up winning the Weekly Series National Championship, and then I'm doing the media day for that with Dale. And at the end of it, they announced to me that I'm driving the 8 car part-time in 2021. So I had no idea that
No kidding.
I had no idea that was going on. I think Brian knew maybe the day before that they were planning on doing that. And they surprised it, just threw it on me in the middle of an interview, right? I'm like, whoa.
Holy crap.
And I think that, that was just such an incredible opportunity. I just remember how happy, Dale was, but LW and Kelly just to like do it, they said, hey, we're going to go. It was 12 races at the start of 21. And they were like, hey, we just want to go do this and see what happens.
Yeah.
Right. It was kind of, and I remember that evening, like feeling like something that I'm like, I can make it. Like, this is my chance. Like this can work now. Like for whatever reason, I didn't feel like that before. I felt like I wanted to win every late model race in the country and wanted to go race in the snowball derby, wanted to go, wanted to do all these things that I had to check off my bucket list. And then now it's like my mentality changed that day. And I'm like, I can make it. I can make this work. And I don't really know, I think part of the reason that I got that opportunity was because of how well I did in the late model. I think that there were some people that passed on the opportunity because it wasn't full time. Some people that might surprise you that didn't want that opportunity because it wasn't full time and it wasn't this and whatever. And so I got that opportunity, and the 5th race in, we win at Martinsville, and it kind of just changes my life.
Made the trajectory of your career go straight to the top. So you go through the Xfinity cars, you go through Dale, and I don't know if you know this story, but the management at Stewart-Haas Racing actually came to Rodney and I and said, hey, we need to find, after I told them in July, a year and a half before, that I was going to retire. And so at the beginning of the next year, they came to us and said, hey, we need to find, you guys need to decide who you want to drive this car. So Rodney and I talked about it. And he, he was adamant, from the very beginning that he thought it should be you to drive the car. And I had actually never really followed the Cars Tour stuff or the late model stuff. And so I started going back and looking at those races and watching the Xfinity races. And we finally both agreed that it needed to be you. And so the first person I called was Dale. I said, hey, here's what I'm thinking. What do you think? And he was just like, absolutely, let me know what I have to do to make it happen. We will figure it out if that's what we need to do. And that's how that conversation started. I don't know, how it would have all progressed if it wasn't Dale owning the car and Kelly to be able to work through those scenarios to actually have you come drive the 4 car. So that was pretty cool stuff to see it all play out. Obviously, it didn't play out how we all thought it was going to play out with Stewart-Haas Racing selling their charters and everything. But now you're in a spot probably where you've never been before in your whole career, going to the 21 car, going to the Wood Brothers with a stable environment. You have all these pieces in place. You know where you're going to work before the end of July. Mm-hmm. And what's that feel like?
No, it's been a really fun experience, honestly. Getting to know those guys they're just super
great
good people. Great people. And just how excited they are for all this, I think it's been really fun. And then obviously the Wood Brothers has a great relationship with Team Penske. So getting to know some of the guys there, I think that's going to be a really good relationship for me. I think having the structure and the environment that they create there, I think is going to be a good fit for me. And honestly, one thing that was really important to me too is working alongside of them and being able to learn from, Joey Logano and Ryan Blaney and Austin throughout that. Right. I think that's only going to accelerate where I'm at as a driver, because I feel like it's like we talked about earlier. I feel like the potential's there, like being able to focus in and harness, corral that and become more consistent. And I think those guys will have great insight on how to do that. And I have a funny story too. Before I was going to say with the 4-car thing, like the first thing I remember is we were at the Fox Media Day, and you came up to me and you were like, "Hey, did anybody call you?" And I'm like, I mean, of
That's
course,
right.
I'm like, yeah, and I'm like looking at you like, what? I'm
Yeah.
thinking like you're going to say something about the Cars tour or something like that, and you're like, I'm like, what? And you're like, the 4-car, and I'm like, huh? And I think you told me to ask Dale about it or something like that. So then I get in the car after that. I'm sitting there thinking about it the whole time. So then I get in the car and I'm driving home, and I call Dale and I'm like, "Hey, did you forget to tell me something?" And he's like, "What?" And I'm like, "Well, Kevin," I said the story, and he's like, "Oh yeah, he did. I meant to tell you that." He didn't. He must have forgot, I
Yeah.
guess.
Well, I think he was playing dumb because he called me. He's like, "Hey, Josh asked me about this 4-car. Is it okay can I talk about it? What do I need to do here?" And so, Dale
Yeah.
better than I know Dale. And I think it's just funny because he gets so excited about things and wants to tell everybody.
Yeah.
And in that particular moment, he wasn't telling a soul because he didn't want to mess it up for
Yeah.
you. So he was actually calling to make sure it was okay. But it's pretty cool to have somebody like Dale Jr. on your side like that. And obviously you guys have a great relationship of the things that you guys have been through in life, racing. But I'm super, super happy for you to be able to be in a position to where you can plan your life and have that kind of that calm before the storm before going to the 21 car, but know that you're going to be the driver. You've got a team, you've got a sponsor, you've got all the things in place that you've worked for your whole life to get to that point. But before I let you go, I have to ask you the normal question that I ask everybody. And that was, it's a tough one, but what was your very first car? Do you remember that you actually bought and drove when you were able to drive?
Like that I bought myself?
Street car, yeah.
My first car was a S10, but I didn't buy that. My dad bought it. It was like a single cab S10,
Yeah.
white, like the real small one, like the
Yeah.
ones that you see.
Did you
at,
do
like, the
anything
auto
to
parts.
it?
No,
Just drove it.
Just drove the hell out
Yeah.
of it. Yeah.
Where'd it
And,
go? Did you wreck it? Sell it?
We sold it, and then I got like I ended up when I was like later in high school, I bought like a little Nissan Altima or something that got a little better gas mileage and stuff. But I actually bought that one. But yeah, I don't remember what happened.
You had some real speed demons.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're real speed demons. Well, I appreciate you taking the time today.
Yeah.
It's good I think it's always fun to hear different people's stories and a lot of these trials and tribulations that people have along the way of everything that they go through. People don't hear. They only see what they see on Sundays and Saturdays on the big TV. So I appreciate you taking the time. Good luck.
Man.
Well, I want to thank Josh Berry for taking the time to come inside the studio and take all the tough questions. But it's always intriguing to me to hear the path and stories of all these guys and gals that come to the studio. So we thank Josh. We encourage everybody to follow us on YouTube or anywhere else on social media. And we'll see you next week.